On the night of October 14, 2023, the Isaacs family was brutally murdered in their suburban home in Phoenix, Arizona, in what would later be revealed as a desperate act to conceal years of financial fraud. Robert Isaacs, 42, his wife Brandy, 40, and their children Sophia, 16, and Thomas, 13, were found dead in their beds, each having suffered multiple stab wounds in what initially appeared to be a home invasion gone wrong. The victims were discovered when Robert failed to show up for an important meeting at his accounting firm, prompting a colleague to request a welfare check at the family's home in the Arcadia neighborhood, a typically peaceful community known for its citrus trees and views of Camelback Mountain. What investigators didn't know yet was that these deaths were intricately connected to millions of dollars in missing church funds and a respected community figure who had been living a double life. If you're watching this video, please hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to light. The murders occurred on a Saturday night when the desert heat had finally begun to relent, giving way to the more moderate temperatures that Phoenix residents eagerly anticipate each fall. Father Michael Donovan arrived at the Isaacs home shortly after 10 p.m., dressed not in his clerical collar but in dark clothing and latex gloves, carrying a bag containing zip ties, duct tape, and a hunting knife purchased specifically for this purpose from a sporting goods store 50 miles outside the city limits. Security footage would later show his black sedan driving through the neighborhood at 9:47 p.m., though the vehicle's license plate was deliberately obscured with mud. The priest had meticulously planned this visit, knowing the family's routines from years of close interaction with them as parishioners, choosing a time when neighbors were likely to be either out or already asleep, and parking his car 3 blocks away to avoid immediate association with the scene. The Isaacs had welcomed Father Donovan into their home many times before, for dinner, for prayer, to discuss church matters, and on this night they likely did the same, unaware of the danger that had crossed their threshold. Robert Isaacs had recently completed a voluntary financial audit of St. Catherine's Catholic Church, where Father Donovan had served as parish priest for the past decade, discovering over $2.3 million in funds had been systematically diverted over 8 years. Though Robert had not yet publicly disclosed his findings, he had scheduled a meeting with the Diocese Financial Oversight Board for October 16th, just 2 days away, and had confided in his wife and teenage daughter about the disturbing discovery. Investigators would later find Robert's detailed spreadsheets and documentation on his laptop, along with emails to the diocese requesting the urgent meeting, providing a clear motive for the timing of the attack. What happened inside the home was reconstructed through forensic evidence, revealing a methodical killer who sought to eliminate not just Robert, but every member of the family who might have knowledge of the financial malfeasance. The violence began in the master bedroom, where Robert and Brandy were attacked first, with evidence suggesting Robert was subdued quickly while still half asleep. But Brandy had time to fight back, scratching her attacker and leaving crucial DNA evidence under her fingernails. Sophia and Thomas were killed next, neither showing signs of significant struggle, suggesting they may have been asleep when attacked or were too disoriented to effectively resist. All 4 victims suffered multiple stab wounds, primarily to the chest and neck, with precision that suggested knowledge of human anatomy or research into efficient killing methods. The crime scene initially confused detectives from the Phoenix Police Department's homicide unit due to its contradictory elements. While the scene had some characteristics of a home invasion, a forced entry through a back window, drawers left open in the master bedroom, and the wife's jewelry box emptied onto the bed, other aspects seemed inconsistent with typical burglary homicides. Nothing of significant value was actually taken from the home, including electronics, cash, and several pieces of expensive jewelry that had been overlooked. The home's alarm system had been deactivated using the correct code, not bypassed, as would be expected in a break-in, suggesting the killer either knew the family well enough to have their code or had somehow coerced a family member to provide it. The staged break-in showed an amateur's understanding of what such a crime should look like, rather than the patterns typically seen in actual burglaries. The neighborhood where the Isaacs lived was one of those Phoenix enclaves where privacy walls and desert landscaping created both physical and psychological barriers between homes, perhaps explaining why no one reported hearing the violence that occurred that night. The family's Spanish-style home, with its thick adobe walls and double-pane windows installed to keep out the desert heat, had inadvertently created an acoustically isolated environment where screams could go unheard. Their nearest neighbor, Eleanor Whitman, would later tell detectives she thought she heard a car door slam around 11:30 p.m., but saw nothing when she looked out her window, attributing the sound to someone returning late from dinner. The perfect Phoenix night, clear, mild, with a slight breeze carrying the scent of citrus, had masked the sounds of a family's final moments. Father Donovan left the Isaacs' home shortly after midnight, having spent over 2 hours inside, ensuring his crime was complete and attempting to stage the scene. Traffic cameras captured his sedan driving through an intersection 5 miles from the crime scene at 12:23 a.m., with the driver's face partially visible and matching the priest's profile. He returned to the rectory of St. Catherine's Church, where he lived alone, entering through a side door not covered by the church's security cameras. The next morning, October 15th, Father Donovan conducted Sunday Mass as scheduled, delivering a sermon on forgiveness and community support during difficult times. Several parishioners would later recall that the priest seemed unusually subdued during the service, attributing it at the time to fatigue rather than the weight of his actions from the night before. The bodies were discovered Monday morning, October 16th, when Robert failed to appear for both his work commitments and the scheduled meeting with the Diocese Financial Board. Jason Mercer, Robert's colleague at the accounting firm where he worked, called the Isaacs home and, receiving no answer, contacted Brandy's school, learning she had not arrived for her teaching position that morning. Increasingly concerned, Mercer drove to the Isaacs home during his lunch break, finding newspapers piled by the front door and both family cars in the garage. After repeated knocking went unanswered, Mercer called 911, reporting that something felt seriously wrong given the family's reliability and Robert's important scheduled meeting that day. Officers Miguel Rodriguez and Sarah Patel responded to the welfare check call at 1:17 p.m., approaching the situation as routine until they noticed what appeared to be blood smeared on the inside of a window visible from the back patio. Following department protocol, they requested backup before making entry through the unlocked back door, where they discovered what would later be described in their report as a scene of extraordinary violence that appeared to have been executed with both precision and rage. The officers secured the scene, confirmed all 4 family members were deceased, and immediately called for homicide detectives and crime scene technicians to begin what would become one of the most high-profile murder investigations in recent Phoenix history. Detective Logan Brooks arrived at the scene at 2:05 p.m., bringing 15 years of homicide investigation experience to bear on a case that would test both his professional skills and personal resilience. The temperature outside had climbed to 92 degrees, typical for mid-October in Phoenix, and the house's air conditioning had been running continuously since the murders, preserving the scene from the worst effects of decomposition despite the nearly 38 hours that had elapsed. Brooks's first observation, noted in his case log, was that the scene reads like someone's idea of what a home invasion should look like, rather than what they typically do, immediately raising his suspicions about the true nature of the crime. Robert Isaacs was more than just the 42-year-old victim of a horrific crime. He was the foundation of his family, a respected CPA whose analytical mind and integrity had earned him the trust of clients and colleagues throughout Phoenix. Friends described him as methodical and principled, with a keen eye for detail that served him well both in his professional life at the accounting firm of Mercer, Landis and Associates, and in his volunteer work as financial committee chair at St. Catherine's Catholic Church. Robert's colleagues spoke of his ability to spot irregularities in even the most complex financial statements, a skill that ultimately led him to uncover the massive embezzlement scheme that would cost him and his family their lives. His office at home contained neatly organized files, a desk calendar with family events marked in green and work commitments in blue, and photographs of hiking trips to the Grand Canyon with his children, evidence of a man who valued both order and adventure. Brandy Isaacs, 40, brought warmth and compassion to her role as a fourth-grade teacher at Desert Willow Elementary School, where she had taught for 12 years and was beloved by students, parents, and fellow educators alike. As the church volunteer coordinator at St. Catherine's, she organized everything from food drives to community outreach programs, maintaining detailed spreadsheets of volunteers and hours that reflected her organizational skills and dedication to service. Colleagues at her school described her classroom as a haven of creativity and kindness, with walls covered in student artwork and bookshelves filled with diverse literature she had personally collected to engage young minds. The last entry in her journal, found on her nightstand, expressed her shock and disappointment about Father Donovan's betrayal, writing, "How will we explain this to the congregation? So many people trusted him with not just their donations but their spiritual lives." Sophia Isaacs, at 16, was a junior at Phoenix Central High School, where she maintained a 4.0 GPA while serving as editor of the school newspaper and competing on the debate team. As an altar server at St. Catherine's since the age of 12, she had recently taken on additional responsibilities helping organize donation records, a role that likely exposed her to some of the financial irregularities her father had been investigating. Her bedroom told the story of a thoughtful young woman balancing typical teenage interests with deeper intellectual pursuits. Posters of pop musicians shared wall space with framed quotes from female philosophers, and her bookshelf contained both young adult fiction and weighty tomes on world religions and ethics. Friends would later tell detectives that in the weeks before her death, Sophia had seemed troubled, confiding in her closest friend Megan that something serious is happening at church, but Dad says we need to be absolutely sure before we say anything. Thomas Isaacs, the youngest victim at 13, was in many ways still a child despite his transition to adolescence, a sports enthusiast who played baseball for his middle school team and collected trading cards that were meticulously organized in protective sleeves in his room. As an altar boy at St. Catherine's, Thomas had worked closely with Father Donovan during Sunday services, looking up to the priest as a spiritual mentor and father figure beyond his own home. His science teacher described him as curious about everything, noting that he had recently won an honorable mention in the school science fair for a project on desert water conservation. The night before his death, Thomas had texted a friend about an upcoming baseball game, making plans to practice pitching over the weekend, future moments stolen by the very man who had baptized him as an infant. The Isaacs home in the Arcadia neighborhood of Phoenix reflected their 15 years of building a life together. Family photographs lining the hallway showed Robert and Brandy's wedding at St. Catherine's, the birth of each child, family vacations to the California coast, and school achievements framed with parental pride. Their kitchen calendar for October 2023 showed the rhythm of a busy family. Sophia's debate tournaments, Thomas's baseball games, Brandy's teacher conferences, and Robert's scheduled meeting with the diocese financial board boldly circled on October 16th, a meeting he would never attend. Neighbors described the family as private but friendly, the kind who would collect mail for you during vacation and whose children were unfailingly polite, a reputation that made the violence inflicted upon them seem all the more incomprehensible to the community. What made the Isaacs particularly valuable to their community was their consistent, reliable presence, the type of family that forms the backbone of schools, churches, and neighborhoods without seeking recognition or praise. Robert's accounting firm had given him their prestigious Integrity Award the previous year for his work helping local nonprofits navigate tax regulations at reduced rates. Brandy had been named Teacher of the Year at Desert Willow Elementary in 2021, with the principals citing her exceptional ability to reach struggling students and involve parents in their children's education. Sophia had recently been selected for a competitive summer journalism program at Arizona State University, while Thomas had been chosen to represent his school at a regional mathematics competition scheduled for November. The family's connection to St. Catherine's Catholic Church ran deep, with roots stretching back to Robert and Brandy's wedding there in 2006, followed by the baptisms of both children and years of active participation in church life. Robert had joined the financial committee 5 years earlier, bringing his professional expertise to the volunteer position with characteristic thoroughness. Brandy coordinated the church's extensive volunteer programs, managing over 100 regular volunteers who staffed everything from the food pantry to the religious education classes. Sophia had progressed from student to helper in those same religious education classes, while Thomas had recently expressed interest in potentially pursuing the priesthood himself, inspired by his interactions with Father Donovan, a tragic irony that would later haunt those who knew the family. Over the 3 weeks prior to the murders, Robert had been conducting a thorough audit of the church's finances, a routine procedure he performed annually, but which had taken on greater significance when he began noticing discrepancies. According to files recovered from his laptop, he had initially attributed the irregularities to clerical errors or outdated accounting practices. But by October 10th, just 4 days before the murders, Robert had compiled enough evidence to determine that approximately $2.3 million had been systematically diverted from church accounts over an 8-year period, coinciding almost exactly with Father Donovan's tenure at St. Catherine's. The scope of Father Donovan's betrayal extended far beyond financial theft, affecting the more than 200 families who had entrusted their spiritual lives to his guidance. Parents who had brought their infants to him for baptism, teenagers who had confided their deepest struggles during confession, elderly parishioners who had found comfort in his hospital visits, all would be forced to re-evaluate these sacred interactions in light of his crimes. Many of these community members would later attend the Isaacs' funeral, forming a procession that stretched for over a mile as they accompanied the 4 caskets to the cemetery, a visible testament to the void this family's loss had created in the fabric of Phoenix society. The investigation would reveal that Robert had shared his concerns about the financial discrepancies with Brandy and Sophia, though he had apparently tried to shield Thomas from the troubling discovery. Brandy's sister, Caroline Mitchell, told detectives that Brandy had called her on October 12th, 2 days before the murders, sounding distressed about something Robert found at church, but providing few details, saying only that it's worse than anyone could imagine, and that Robert was gathering final documentation before the meeting with diocese officials. This conversation would later be cited as evidence that multiple family members had knowledge of the embezzlement, explaining why Father Donovan felt compelled to silence the entire household rather than just Robert. The tragedy of the Isaacs family is compounded by how close they came to exposing the truth before falling victim to it. Had Robert's meeting with the diocese financial board occurred as scheduled on October 16th, Father Donovan's schemes would have been revealed. Funds might have been recovered, and legal proceedings would have replaced violence as the consequence of his actions. Instead, the family's diligence and commitment to truth became the catalyst for their deaths, transforming them from living members of their community to symbols of betrayal's devastating cost. The 911 call came in at 1:14 p.m. on Monday, October 16, 2023, when Jason Mercer's concerned voice reported his inability to contact the Isaacs family. "I'm at their house now and something's definitely wrong," Mercer told the dispatcher, his professional composure beginning to crack as he described the accumulation of newspapers, both cars in the garage, and complete silence from within the home. The dispatch operator classified the call as a priority welfare check rather than an emergency, but added a note that the caller was a reliable source with valid concerns about a family of 4 not responding, elevating its position in the response queue. Within minutes, officers Rodriguez and Patel were diverted from their patrol route in an adjacent neighborhood, arriving at the scene at 1:17 p.m. to find Mercer pacing anxiously on the front lawn of the well-maintained Spanish-style home that sat behind a neatly trimmed oleander hedge. Officer Rodriguez's body camera captured the initial approach to the house, recording Mercer's explanation that Robert Isaacs was absolutely reliable and had missed an extremely important meeting with church officials that morning. Robert's been auditing the church finances for weeks, and today was when he was supposed to present his findings to the diocese, Mercer explained, his accounting background evident in his precise description of the situation. The 2 officers performed a perimeter check of the property, following standard protocol for welfare concerns, with Officer Patel's body camera recording the critical moment when she peered through a back window and noticed what appeared to be a reddish-brown smear on the inside of the glass. "Miguel, I've got what looks like blood here." Her voice came through clearly on the recording, immediately changing the tenor of the call from routine to potentially life-threatening. The officers called for backup before making entry through an unlocked back door, drawing their service weapons as they announced Phoenix Police and moved systematically through the lower level of the home. The body camera footage, later reviewed frame by homicide detectives, showed the officers discovering signs of disturbance. A toppled lamp in the living room, kitchen drawers left partially open, and, most significantly, drops of what would later be confirmed as blood on the tile floor leading toward the staircase. Officer Rodriguez radioed dispatch at 1:26 p.m., his voice tight with controlled tension. "We're going to need detectives and CSI at this location. We have signs of violence and no contact with residents yet." The dispatcher acknowledged upgrading the call to a potential crime scene and dispatching additional units while the 2 officers continued their careful ascent of the staircase, following their training to clear the entire residence before focusing on any single area. The discovery of the bodies, captured on the officers' body cameras but later restricted from public release out of respect for the victims, showed the professionalism of Rodriguez and Patel even in the face of extreme violence. The master bedroom contained the bodies of Robert and Brandy Isaacs, both with multiple stab wounds and significant blood loss that had soaked through the bedding and onto the carpet below. Sophia and Thomas were found in their respective bedrooms, similarly attacked, with evidence suggesting Sophia may have woken during the assault based on defensive wounds on her hands and arms. Officer Patel checked for pulses on all 4 victims, confirming at 1:32 p.m. what was already visually apparent. "Dispatch, we have 4 deceased individuals, apparent homicide. Scene is secure, but we'll maintain position until detectives arrive." The officers then withdrew to the home's entryway, preserving the scene from contamination while securing the perimeter with additional officers who began arriving minutes later. Detective Logan Brooks arrived at 2:05 p.m., accompanied by his partner, Detective Maya Fernandez. both from the Phoenix Police Department's homicide unit. Brooks, known for his methodical approach and attention to detail, began by interviewing Mercer outside the crime scene, establishing a timeline of when the family was last known to be alive. Robert texted me yesterday morning around 9 a.m., confirming he had all the documentation ready for today's meeting, Mercer stated in his recorded interview, providing investigators with their first crucial time frame. He was going to present evidence of what he called significant financial discrepancies at the church, but he wouldn't give me specifics over the phone. This information immediately gave detectives a potential motive to investigate, though Brooks was careful not to jump to conclusions, instructing the officers securing the scene to treat the case as a possible home invasion until evidence proved otherwise. Crime scene investigators arrived at 2:20 p.m., led by senior CSI technician Dr. Aisha Johnson, who would later testify that the Isaacs crime scene was one of the most meticulously documented in her 15-year career. The CSI team spent the next 14 hours processing the scene, photographing and collecting over 200 pieces of evidence, including blood samples from various locations, fingerprints, fibers, and most critically, scrapings from beneath Brandy Isaacs' fingernails that appeared to contain skin cells not her own. Dr. Johnson noted in her preliminary report that while the scene had characteristics of a home invasion, certain inconsistencies suggest this may be a stage scene intended to misdirect investigators. These inconsistencies included the selective nature of the disturbance, with some valuable items left untouched while others of lesser value were scattered, and the fact that the home security system had been deactivated using the correct code rather than being disabled or triggered. The medical examiner, Dr. Thomas Chen, arrived at 3:45 p.m. to make his initial assessment before the bodies would be transported to the morgue for autopsy. Dr. Chen's preliminary examination at the scene established an estimated time of death between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. on the night of October 14, 15, based on body temperature, lividity, and rigor mortis. All four victims appear to have died from multiple stab wounds to the torso and neck, Dr. Chen noted in his on-scene report, adding that the precision of certain wounds, particularly those to the carotid artery, suggests either training or research into efficient killing methods. This observation would later become significant as investigators learned about Father Donovan's background, which included a brief period studying medicine before entering the seminary. As the CSI team meticulously processed the scene, Detectives Brooks and Fernandez expanded their investigation outward, interviewing neighbors and establishing a canvass of the surrounding blocks. Eleanor Whitman, the Isaacs' next-door neighbor, provided the first potentially significant lead when she mentioned hearing a car door close around 11:30 p.m. on Saturday night. "I thought it was odd because it sounded close, but not like it was in a driveway," Whitman told Detective Fernandez, who made note of this timing as consistent with the medical examiner's preliminary time of death estimate. Another neighbor, James Cortez, reported seeing an unfamiliar sedan parked on a side street about 3 blocks away when he walked his dog around 10:15 p.m., describing it as dark-colored, maybe navy or black, but unable to recall the make or model. While the neighborhood canvass continued, Detective Brooks obtained a warrant to access Robert Isaacs' personal and work computers, working with the department's digital forensics unit to recover files related to the church audit Robert had been conducting. By 6:30 p.m., just hours into the investigation, they had uncovered a folder labeled St. Catherine's Financial Review 2023, containing spreadsheets, bank statements, and a draft report addressed to Bishop Anthony Morales and the Diocesan Financial Oversight Board. The report documented systematic diversion of funds from church accounts to several offshore accounts, through a complex series of transfers designed to avoid detection, totaling approximately $2.3 million over 8 years. Robert's notes within the files specifically mentioned Father Michael Donovan's exclusive access to certain accounts and unusual patterns of transfers that coincided with the priest's periodic vacations. The discovery of these files shifted the investigation's focus dramatically, with Brooks immediately dispatching officers to locate and interview Father Donovan, who was found conducting an evening prayer service at St. Catherine's Church. The officers were instructed not to detain the priest, but to request he come to the station for an interview regarding the Isaacs family, without mentioning the financial investigation or treating him as a suspect at this stage. Father Donovan agreed to the interview, expressing appropriate shock and concern about the family's death, and arrived at the Phoenix Police Headquarters at 8:15 p.m., where Detectives Brooks and Fernandez were waiting to conduct what would be the first of several interviews with the man who would eventually be charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The most significant breakthrough in the early investigation came at 11:42 p.m. on October 16th, when Dr. Johnson called Detective Brooks from the crime lab with preliminary results from the fingernail scrapings taken from Brandy Isaacs. "We have foreign DNA," Dr. Johnson reported, her voice betraying unusual excitement for the typically reserved scientist. "The sample is substantial enough for rapid analysis, and we should have results within 24 hours if you can get us a comparison sample." This development led Brooks to extend his initial interview with Father Donovan, who had been maintaining a convincing presentation of pastoral concern for the family, and to request a voluntary DNA sample, which the priest provided without objection, a decision he would later regret when represented by legal counsel. By the morning of October 17th, approximately 24 hours into the investigation, detectives had gathered enough preliminary evidence to focus their investigation primarily on Father Donovan, though they maintained the appearance of a broader inquiry. Search warrants were being prepared for the priest's residence at the church rectory, his personal vehicle, and his financial records. Brooks assigned officers to discreetly monitor Donovan's movements without his knowledge while awaiting the DNA comparison results. In a private meeting with the Phoenix police chief and representatives from the district attorney's office, Brooks laid out the evolving theory of the case. "We have a victim who discovered a massive embezzlement scheme, scheduled a meeting to expose it, and was killed along with his family 2 days before that meeting could take place. The person with the most to lose from that meeting appears to have had the means, motive, and opportunity to commit these murders." The autopsy results began coming in late on October 17th, with Dr. Chen confirming his initial assessments and providing additional details that would prove crucial to the prosecution's case. All 4 victims had died from multiple stab wounds, with Robert sustaining 17 wounds, Brandy 12, Sophia 9, and Thomas 7, suggesting the killer had been most frenzied in the attack on the father, likely the primary target. The wounds on Robert and Brandy showed differences in depth and precision, with Robert's appearing to have been inflicted while he was unaware or incapacitated, while Brandy's indicated she had time to struggle, consistent with the defensive wounds on her hands and the skin cells found beneath her fingernails. Dr. Chen also noted bruising patterns on the children, suggesting they had been restrained, possibly with zip ties, before being killed. Evidence of premeditation that would later support the first-degree murder charges. The final critical discovery of the initial investigation phase came at 7:23 a.m. on October 18th, when the crime lab called with the DNA comparison results. The sample from beneath Brandy Isaacs' fingernails was a match to the DNA provided voluntarily by Father Michael Donovan, with the lab director stating the probability of a false match at less than 1 in 1 billion. With this evidence in hand, combined with the financial motive established through Robert's files and the priest's opportunity to commit the crimes during his unaccounted hours that Saturday night, Detectives Brooks and Fernandez secured an arrest warrant for Father Michael Donovan on 4 counts of first-degree murder. The man who had baptized over 200 children in the Phoenix community, heard countless confessions, and presided over weddings and funerals would now face justice for the most profound betrayal imaginable, not just of his religious vows, but of the very lives of a family who had trusted him as their spiritual guide. The DNA evidence from beneath Brandy Isaacs' fingernails transformed the investigation, shifting it from a broad inquiry with multiple potential directions to a focused case building against one suspect, Father Michael Donovan. Detective Logan Brooks received the lab confirmation at his desk, the phone pressed tightly to his ear, as the lab technician detailed the match statistics. The probability of randomly selecting an unrelated individual with this DNA profile is approximately 1 in 1.2 billion. Brooks scribbled this figure on his notepad, circling it twice before thanking the technician and immediately calling his partner. "We've got him, Maya," he said to Detective Fernandez, his normally measured tone giving way to the urgency of the moment. "The DNA under Brandy's nails is Donovan's statistical certainty. I'm calling the DA right now for an arrest warrant." This single piece of physical evidence, a mother's last defensive act as she fought her attacker, had created the first unbreakable link between the trusted priest and the brutal murders. As the warrant was being processed, Brooks and Fernandez compiled a comprehensive timeline of Father Donovan's activities in the days surrounding the murders, identifying a critical window of approximately 4 hours on the night of October 14th, when the priest's whereabouts could not be accounted for. Church records showed Donovan had conducted an evening confession session until 8:30 p.m., after which he told the parish secretary he was retiring for the evening with a migraine. His next confirmed appearance was at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning as he prepared for early Mass, leaving a gap that perfectly encompassed the medical examiner's estimated time of death. When questioned about this period during his initial interview, Donovan had claimed to be alone in the rectory reading and praying, a claim impossible to verify but equally impossible to disprove without contradicting evidence. The financial investigation was proceeding in parallel, with forensic accountants from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division now assisting the Phoenix police with analyzing the complex money trail Robert Isaacs had begun to unravel. Special Agent Catherine Walsh, specializing in financial crimes, reviewed Robert's documentation and expanded on his findings, discovering that the embezzled $2.3 million had been transferred through a series of shell companies before ultimately being deposited in accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. What's remarkable about Isaac's work, Agent Walsh noted in her preliminary report, is that he managed to trace the funds through multiple layers of concealment with limited resources and authority, essentially doing what would typically require a team of federal investigators and international cooperation agreements. The paper trail connecting these accounts to Father Donovan included signature cards from the offshore banks, wire transfer authorizations bearing his handwriting, and travel records showing his presence in the Cayman Islands coinciding with the opening of the accounts. While the financial and DNA evidence was compelling, detectives needed to establish opportunity and means, leading them to expand their canvas of the Isaacs neighborhood. A breakthrough came when officers located a home 3 blocks from the crime scene with an external security camera that captured a partial view of the street where Eleanor Whitman had heard a car door close around 11:30 p.m. Reviewing the footage, analysts from the department's Technical Investigations Unit enhanced an image showing a dark sedan parked at 10:02 p.m. and then leaving at 12:17 a.m. Though the vehicle's license plate was not visible and the driver's face was obscured, the car's make and model, a black Audi A4, matched the vehicle registered to Father Donovan, which was now being thoroughly processed by the CSI team. The search of Donovan's vehicle yielded crucial physical evidence connecting him to the crime scene. Using luminol and alternative light sources, CSI technicians discovered traces of blood in the trunk that had been meticulously cleaned but not completely removed. Preliminary testing indicated the blood was human, and samples were expedited for DNA comparison with the victims. Additionally, a receipt from a hardware store 40 miles outside Phoenix was found in the glove compartment, dated October 12th, for the purchase of latex gloves, duct tape, and a hunting knife with a 6-inch blade, items consistent with both the restraint marks on the victims and the size and shape of the stab wounds identified in the autopsy. The search of Father Donovan's residence at the church rectory revealed a man living far beyond the means of a parish priest. Behind the modest furnishings of his official quarters, investigators discovered a hidden safe containing over $25,000 in cash, a collection of luxury watches valued at more than $100,000, and documentation for a condominium in Scottsdale purchased through one of the shell companies identified in the financial investigation. Detective Fernandez, cataloging these items, remarked to Brooks, "He was building a nest egg for an exit strategy. The question is, was he planning to run before or after Isaacs exposed him?" This evidence of hidden wealth provided additional support for the financial motive, suggesting Donovan had been systematically preparing for a life funded by the embezzled church donations. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Father Donovan's computer, which the digital forensics unit had been methodically examining. Technicians recovered a series of deleted internet searches from October 9 to 13, the days immediately after Robert Likely discovered the embezzlement and before the murders. These searches included how to stage a home invasion, undetectable poisons, knife wounds, fatal locations, human body, and, most incriminating, can DNA be found under fingernails after death? This digital trail painted a picture of a desperate man researching how to commit murder and avoid detection in the days leading up to the crime, directly contradicting his presentation as a shocked and grieving pastor during his initial police interview. With the arrest warrant secured, Brooks faced a tactical decision about how to apprehend Father Donovan with minimal public spectacle while ensuring officer safety. "This is going to send shock waves through the community," Brooks told Phoenix Police Chief Garcia during their strategy meeting. "We need to handle this with extreme sensitivity while still treating him as the dangerous suspect he is." The decision was made to arrest Donovan at the rectory rather than at the church during services, with plainclothes officers positioned to ensure he couldn't flee if he somehow became aware of the impending arrest. The operation was scheduled for 7 a.m. on October 19th, 5 days after the murders and 3 days into the investigation. The arrest itself was captured on body cameras, showing Father Donovan opening the rectory door in his bathrobe, momentarily freezing as he recognized Brooks and Fernandez, accompanied by 4 uniformed officers. "Father Michael Donovan, you're under arrest for the murders of Robert Brandy, Sophia, and Thomas Isaacs," Brooks stated formally, his voice steady as he read the priest his Miranda rights. Donovan's face, initially registering shock, quickly composed itself into a mask of dignified denial as he requested to dress before being taken to the station. The officers allowed this, with female detective Fernandez and a female officer accompanying him to his bedroom to ensure he didn't attempt to destroy evidence or harm himself, a precaution that proved unnecessary as Donovan dressed silently, his clerical collar left untouched on the dresser as he opted for civilian clothes. News of the arrest spread rapidly through Phoenix, with local stations breaking into regular programming to report that the beloved priest of St. Catherine's had been arrested for the quadruple homicide of a parish family. The initial public reaction was predominantly disbelief, with many parishioners gathering outside the police station in spontaneous vigil, some holding signs proclaiming Father Donovan's innocence, and others simply praying in confused anguish. Maria Gonzalez, who had served as the church's office administrator for over a decade, told reporters through tears, "There must be some terrible mistake. Father Michael baptized my grandchildren. He visits the sick in hospitals every week. He couldn't possibly do what they're saying." While public sentiment initially favored Donovan, investigators continued building their case methodically, with Brooks conducting a thorough background investigation into the priest's life before he came to St. Catherine's. What emerged was a pattern of short tenures at parishes across 3 different dioceses, always moving before completing a full accounting cycle at any single location. Most significantly, Brooks discovered that Donovan had briefly studied medicine at Johns Hopkins University before abruptly leaving the program and entering the seminary, providing a possible explanation for the precision of certain wounds noted by the medical examiner. A former class